Tilea's Troubles, Part 145. What Plans Lie in Ruins. Another excerpt from Bonacorso Fidelibus's work, The Many Wars of the Early 25th Century. The End of Summer, 2405. In the far north, the massive ratmen army that had travelled in spring by way of the road from Ravola to Miragliano was followed several months later by a force consisting of Teta Verde elves and Krak dwarves. The former carried beautifully carved longbows and elegant swords, some marching in close step, while other, wilder souls strode more lissomely. The latter hefted heavy iron handguns of cunning design, as well as short, broad-bladed swords and fighting axes. This unusual alliance was guided by a company of Arrabbiati riders, the Audaci Arcieri, making it perhaps one of the strangest alliances forged in Tilea for centuries. Sylvan elves, mountain dwarves, and brigand outlaws. As the summer came to an end, the pursuers drew close to the city of Miragliano and made camp. There they wrestled with the decision they now had to make. Could they, take on the enemy, considering the disparity in numbers and the difficulties presented by the boggy terrain? The commanders were as chalk and cheese, and yet worked in harmony in their efforts to find a way not only to get to grips with the foe, but to do so in a way which might be both victorious and have a real effect on the ratmen's future goals. Lord Veluthil of the Forest Elves proved to be a veritable cornucopia of ideas, yet there was such a complexity of ifs and buts to his stratagems that all seemed to falter in the planning. Thane Nahak of the Mountain Dwarfs listened to every proposal, dismissing none hastily, himself speaking only when his ideas were fully considered, and, to the surprise of his own officers, not once giving the impression of the slightest hint of impatience or exasperation. Among their several discussions, they debated what possible reason the ratmen had for occupying the burnt-out ruins of Miragliano, finally agreeing that whatever it was had lured the rats across the entire northern reaches of Tilea, travelling openly upon the world's surface rather than in their secret underpasses. It must surely have been of some considerable importance. While the army pondered its next move, the dwarf's flying machine and the elven warhawk riders spied upon the city from above, hoping to discover the enemy's plans, especially if they intended to sally out to attack the alliance force nervously camped close by. Within the ruined city of cracked stone, where barely a shiver of unscorched timber had survived the great incendium sparked by Lord Alessio Portamaggiore, the ratmen squatted in makeshift huts and hovels, as even more of their own kind, as well as enslaved men, arrived from the north to further swell their numbers. The poor men-slaves had been taken mainly from the realms of Ravola and Campagrotta, since when they had suffered such miserable imprisonment and uncountable cruelties that only the hardiest survived. Worse still, they had been fed meat and drink laced with the tiniest pinches of powdered skystone, a poison which had twisted and bent their bodies, imbuing them with a tortured kind of strength and endurance. Each bore a manacle at his wrist, through which a chain was run when they camped or slept, so that none could escape. Otherwise, when on the march, the chain was removed, and their ratmen overseers employed long whips to lash them into obedience, driving them this way and that. When it was at last required, those same whips would send them into a crazed, fighting frenzy. Unlike ratmen slaves, they were armed almost wholly with clubs, as their masters did not trust them with blades, although one or two clubs bore iron barbs, and many more had an iron band at the extremity, to add a little more punch to their blows in battle. All new arrivals were inspected by Lord Krak, herded before him like cattle might be exhibited to a prospective buyer at a market. Accompanied by several of his purple-clad bodyguard, Lord Krak took considerable pleasure in deciding which slaves were satisfactory and which were inadequate for his needs. The fate of the latter was a release, of a rather final kind. Unlike his immediate predecessor in Tilea, Lord Erlach, Krak believed that numbers were of more worth in battle than engines of war, that a horde could more certainly gain victory than a battery of clan scry's constructions, that slaves had great use in battle, even man-thing slaves, if employed correctly and in sufficient numbers. And there was the added bonus that should they perish, he still had his clanrat and bodyguard regiments to ensure his safety, even if necessarily retreating. It seemed Krak was keen to account for every slave, to ensure that he had been given exactly what he had paid for he clutched a book containing columns of numbers, as if he were more clerk than grey seer. Perhaps he could not bring himself to trust an underling to perform such an accounting. More likely, he simply enjoyed the act of reckoning up precisely the power at his disposal. Several sea vessels also arrived at Miragliano, the largest of which, indeed the only real ship, was towed by boats into the bay, as its crew had all, bar one, perished from some virulent disease. Krak was apparently expecting the ship, for he immediately ordered his servants to board it. The only survivor, a buccaneering brute, feverishly ranting and raving, and quite unaware of what was happening, was bound in fetters and shackles to be dragged into the city. But more important to Krak was an iron-bound chest found upon the deck. This was lifted onto a litter and carried through the ruined streets to him. The contents were a mystery to the bearers, and even to their overseer. What lay within, however, was clearly of great significance to the grey seer Krak Bittermore, for when it was brought to him, he inspected it gleefully, then ordered his best warriors to guard it day and night. The nature of its contents remained a mystery, but, considering the wicked nature of the ratmen, they could not possibly bode well for Tilea.